Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to be making some foods for my freezer. We're getting back into the swing of things with school and activities, and so I'm going to be making up some things that my kids can just grab out of the freezer for breakfast and lunch. And I want to show you what I'm making today. We're going to do some rolls that are going to have everything bagel seasoning in them and cream cheese. And then we're going to do some French toast and also some biscuits for the freezer. So it's going to be a couple really quick things, and I'm going to get started and show you about that. So I'm getting started with my French toast here, and I'm just going to whip up about 4 eggs, and then I'll add about equal parts milk and just kind of whip it up until it looks right, maybe a little bit more milk, but I never measure this. I just pour it in there together and mix it up till it looks right, and then I'm going to start dipping my bread in it and cooking it on the griddle here. So this is an English muffin bread that I made a few weeks ago, and I just put it in the freezer, and it's a really simple, easy bread to make. And I'm just going to cut that up and just kind of dip it in there just a little bit and get those grilling. So now when you do French toast, you want to make sure that you have your griddle on like a low setting. If you have it on a real warm setting, what's going to happen is it's going to get browned on both sides, and the middle is going to be kind of gooey, and so you don't really want that. So you want to keep it on kind of a low temperature. I think I've got this one on like 300, and then it's going to take a little while to cook. You know, I didn't time it, but probably about 5 minutes or so per side. You can see this here. It's getting really good and cooked up on the first side, and then we are going to flip it over and brown it real good on the second side. So I like to usually serve this with maple syrup, but I'm out of maple syrup today, so I've got some strawberries in the freezer, and I'm just going to get them out and mix them with some sugar, a little squirt of lemon juice, and I'm going to cook them down in that little pot, and that's what we're going to use for syrup today. So it's going to take them a little bit to get up to temp since they were in the freezer, but I'm just going to cook them down for just a few minutes just to kind of get them to where they're mushy, and then we'll blend them up with the stick blender so that it can be nice and smooth. So you can see these have gotten really nice and brown on both sides. So we're just going to take them off, and then we'll get started on our next batch. My kids really love French toast, and it's kind of one of those recipes that I just sort of forget about. It's not hard to make. It's really easy, especially when you have a griddle like this and you can just do a whole bunch of slices at one time. And it also reheats well when you put it in the freezer. You can just get it back out and reheat it, and it does really well that way. So see, once again, these are getting nice and brown, so we're just going to cook them for a few more minutes on the other side, and then our French toast will be finished. So I'm going to just serve this French toast up with a little bit of melted butter and some of that strawberry syrup. And I think it looks so pretty with the strawberry syrup on there. And the kids really liked it. And I'm just going to get this French toast off here, let it cool for a little bit before I put it in the freezer to flash freeze. Now I'm going to get started on our sourdough roll. So this is a recipe from Farmhouse on Boone, and it's like her sourdough dinner rolls recipe, and it is so good. It doesn't take a ton of ingredients. I've got my starter here that I started the night before so it could be working. I've got 2 cups of that, and then I'm going to add the rest of my ingredients. It's just butter and sugar and water and salt and flour, and I am actually quadrupling this. That's normally what I do because the main recipe just makes like an 8x8 pan of rolls. And she says 8 rolls, but I usually have to put more flour in it than it calls for. And so it usually makes about 10 or so rolls. So I quadruple it, and then I'll put a bunch in the freezer, and the kids can pull them out to make like sandwiches and stuff like that. But today, instead of making dinner rolls, we're going to make these like you would do a cinnamon roll, but we're going to make them savory, and we're going to put pepperoni in one, and we're going to put cream cheese and everything bagel seasoning in the other. I did this last week, and it was really good. And so these freeze really well, and you can just pull them out when you need them for lunches and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to do. Now this dough does tend to be very sticky, especially if you're using einkorn flour, and you just kind of have to work with it. Like, I don't want to get it to where it's too dry, but I also don't want it so sticky that I can't work with it after it rises. And so having some trouble with my plastic wrap there. My box is messed up, so it's kind of hard to cut. But we're just going to let that sit on the counter and ferment for about 8 hours or so and rise. And so it'll be ready to make into rolls after that. And then I'm just going to take this French toast. I like to use these cooling racks to stick them in the freezer on. And so I'll just put as many as I can on there, and then I'm going to put them in the freezer to flash freeze, and then we'll put them in a Zip-Top bag later on. So now I left a little bit of my starter in the bottom of my bowl, and this is how I like to feed my starter when I'm sticking it in the fridge to have for later. I just stir it up and make it really, really thick, and then I'm just going to put it back in my glass jar, and it's going to go straight in the fridge, and it'll rise there in the fridge, kind of a slow rise. This keeps it from getting too sour, and I'm not going to be using it right away, so it's fine for it to sit in the fridge for a little while and rise like that, and then the next time I get it out, it won't be super sour, and it'll be pretty ready to use. So now I'm going to work on my biscuit recipe. I just make my normal biscuits like I normally do, but I just don't cook them. I'm going to cut them out, and I'm going to put them in the freezer raw like this. And then you can just pull them out and cook them just like that. So you can grate your butter up if you want to here. I like it to be a little bit more chunky, and so I just cut it into cubes and then kind of mix it in with my hands. So once I get that butter mixed in with my hands really good, I'm going to put my milk in. So I didn't have store-bought buttermilk today, so I just made my own buttermilk with milk and vinegar and let it set out for about 5 or 10 minutes, and that works really good, but the consistency is going to be a little bit different, so I just make up a bunch of it, make up several cups of it, and then kind of see. Biscuits are kind of funny about moisture. It's going to depend on the moisture in your air. It's going to depend on the flour you're using, and so you just kind of have to work with it. It's really better to do it a little bit more wet though than it is to have it too dry, because if it's a little wet, you can just work in a little bit more flour as you're working it. And I just kind of fold my dough over itself a few times. I know some people like to kind of laminate it a little bit more. When I was learning to make biscuits, my grandmother, she told me just not to overwork it. And so I've always remembered that, and I try not to do that with it. So I'm once again going to use a cooling rack here. I'm going to cut out these biscuits, put them on the cooling rack, stick them in the freezer so they can flash freeze, and that way they won't stick to each other. And then I'll get them out later and put them in a Ziploc bag. All right, so now it has been about 8 hours or so, and you can see that dough has risen up really nicely. And so I'm going to cut it into fourths, and that way I can work with 1/4 at a time, because you'll remember we quadrupled this recipe. And then I'm just going to kind of roll this out like you would for cinnamon rolls, and we're going to get started with the pepperoni rolls. You just want to kind of make this into like a rectangular shape, and I'm going to brush it with a little bit of oil. You won't need too much because that pepperoni in itself is kind of greasy. And I've got some basil here I'm going to sprinkle over it. You could use like an Italian seasoning too if you wanted to, or you could just use the pepperoni. It's nice and flavorful in and of itself. So I'm just going to spread that pepperoni all over. I cut it into some smaller pieces. Last time I did it, I did them whole, and that turned out really well also. But I'm just going to cover it now with some mozzarella cheese and some Parmesan cheese. And then we're going to roll it up nice and tight, and we are going to cut that into rolls. I find that with this recipe, usually you can get about 12 rolls out of each section of it, and so that's what I like to do. It works good if you kind of cut it into fourths and then cut each of those fourths into thirds. So anyways, we're going to get those cut and put on the pan, and then we're going to do the same thing all over again. And then these are going to have to rise for a couple of hours. You just kind of have to watch them and look at them and see if they've kind of gotten poofy, and then you'll know if they're risen and ready to go into the oven. We're just going to do the same thing all over again. I had run out of mozzarella cheese, so we used some Colby Jack on this one as well. And I have some nice size pans here that I can fit all 24 rolls on one pan, so that's really nice. And then we're going to get started with the everything bagel ones. So I love these. They have a really nice creamy oniony taste to them. I get my everything bagel seasoning from Aldi. They have a couple different kinds. So they've got like a sea salt kind, and then they have a, or I think it's actually a Himalayan salt kind. And then they also have an Asiago cheese one, and I think a jalapeno one, and they're really good. So this is the Himalayan salt one. I used all of it up, so I had to get out some of the Asiago cheese one, and then we're just going to cut those up really good and put them on our pan just the same as we did the other. And so, like I said, I can fit about 2 sections of that dough on there, about 24 rolls, so it works out really good. Sometimes I like to make like pizza pockets for my kids as well, but I find that this is a little bit quicker and faster because you're not having to crimp all the edges of the pockets, and it's kind of similar. So I'm thinking about trying some other toppings in the middle too, but we've really liked these so far. So these are them resting on the counter, and they're going to rise, and you're going to see them puff up a little bit, and then they'll be ready for the oven. So here they are, they've risen. I'm putting the egg wash on them, and I think they rose for about 2 hours, and you can just see, especially the ones that don't have a lot of filling in them, they're the end pieces, you can see how puffy they are. So that's how I know that they're ready to cook, and they're going to go in the oven and cook for about 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to pull them out and let them cool. Look how amazing those turned out. So I'm just going to let them cool really good, and then I'm going to put them in some bags and put them in the fridge and freezer. So I took these pepperoni rolls off and put them on a cooling rack to cool when they were still kind of warm. And that was really good because then they didn't get soggy on the bottom. I didn't do that with the cream cheese ones, and I should have because they got a little bit soggy. But I went ahead and moved them to the cooling rack for a little bit, let them cool for a few more minutes, and then bagged them up. So I've got 4 bags total of rolls. I'll put 3 in the freezer, and then I'll put 1 in the fridge, and we can have those for lunches this week. So this is what I made today, and I'm excited to have all this in the freezer and ready to go.